Good evening, everybody. God, I feel tall. Oh, thank you. For those of you who don't know what my name means, Reyna Grande means the big queen. But I'm 5 feet tall, so something happened there. I have a big name only, but not the height. But I had to live up to my name. And it was a difficult name to grow up with when you're only 5 feet tall. But eventually I learned to be very proud of that name, and I knew I had to live up to it. So those are the kind of things that I've been doing just to earn the name, the Big Queen. So thank you so much, Villanova University, for this great honor of being here and sharing my book with you all. I have driven past the university many times because I actually have family out here. My sister-in-law, Morgan, where are you? My sister-in-law, Morgan, she's a minister at the Mainline Unitarian Church. She lives in Wayne. And my father-in-law, who's here with me tonight also, he's lived in Philadelphia for many, many years. And my lovely agent, Adriana, who's here also, she lives in Wynwood, which is only a few minutes away. And of course, the committee didn't know I had all this family here when they chose my book, but I was extra happy when I got invited to come here because it's always special to me when I get my family and my agent out here. This is her first time hearing me talk, actually. Like she reminded me of that today, so I hope I do a good job. Gotta make her proud. So thank you so much, the One Book Committee, and thank you, Patty and your husband, John, for being such a wonderful sponsors of this event. And thank you all for coming out tonight on this rainy night. So what I want to do is I want to tell you a little bit about my hometown of Iguala Guerrero before I talk a little bit more about the book. And I'm going to do a question and answer. And I know a lot of you guys have questions for me. So I'm very much looking forward to answering your questions. My hometown of Iguala is about 2.5 hours away from the capital, Mexico City. And in many ways, I compare it to Philadelphia, you know, it's been so close to Washington, D.C. The other thing that's similar is that my hometown, Iguala de la Independencia, it's the birthplace of the national Mexican flag. And that's another thing it has in common with Philadelphia. So Cuna de la Bandera Nacional means the birthplace of the national flag. Iguala is also known for its role that it played in the Mexican War of Independence, and the treaty that ended the war was written in Iguala. And the national anthem, the first time that it was sang there in my hometown of Iguala. So it's a very special place. In the distance between us, I write about my hometown as I experience it as a child over 30 years ago. I write about growing up there with my siblings, my brother, my sister, and I, as you heard from my bio and as you've read, I'm sure many of you here have read the book. We grew up in Iguala without our parents, who immigrated to the United States when I was only 2 years old. And I spent about 8 years in this city longing to have a family, longing to have my father back, my mother back. It was a very difficult place to live because as a child being left behind, I didn't understand why my parents were so far away. And I didn't understand everything that had driven them to leave their children to seek a better life. At the time when my father came here to the US, Mexico was going through a recession. The peso was devalued many times throughout the years. It was the worst recession the country had seen in 50 years, and people were coming here. It was the beginning of the wave that brought many, many immigrants from Mexico for 4 decades. So as we were living there, you know, there were many challenges, But one of the things that I try to write about in the book was also the beauty of Iguala, because to me as a child, I often tended to see the beauty, and I didn't yet know enough to not see the beauty, but to also see all the other things that made my city. But in the book, I write about the beautiful mountains that surround my hometown of Iguala. I write about the Zócalo, the plaza where my siblings and I used to play. I write about the lake, the Lago de Tuxpan. And this is the lake where my brother and my uncle used to go fishing so that we could have something to eat that night. I write about el papel picado that decorated the streets of my community. I write about the train station that was a very important part of my hometown. This train station provided a lot of jobs for people in the community. My sister, at the age of 12, she had to get a job at the train station selling quesadillas at a food stand so that she could put food on the table. This is where my grandfather and my uncles also worked, loading and unloading the freight cars. The train station was a very, very busy place, and people from all over the state would come to take the train there to Mexico City or to Cuernavaca. Vendors would come to sell their clay pots. It was a lovely place. I also write about the dirt roads in my hometown, the shacks, like the shacks where I was born, and the poverty that the people there live in, and the poverty that the children grow up in. Nowadays, the kids growing up in Iguala are growing up in a different city. Their Iguala is not like the Iguala that I knew. You know, in the book I write about the challenges of growing up there, but mostly it was the challenges of growing up as a child separated from her parents. But the kids who are growing up there now, especially, you know, my cousins, I have a lot of cousins there, and my cousins have children. I have a lot of family still there in Iguala, and their Iguala is a very different place from where I used to live there. The children of today in Iguala are dealing with a lot more poverty than what I lived with. In the 1990s, the government privatized the railroad system, and the train in Iguala was suspended. So all the people who depended on the train to make a living, they found themselves unable to put food on the table. My uncles lost their jobs. Many people there were plunged deeper into poverty because the train was taken away. And now what is left is train cars just rusting there on the tracks. So that is what the children of today get to see. They don't get to see the trains come by every day and the passengers coming and the vendors and the wonderful food that used to be sold there. What they see is an empty train station and train cars rusting on the tracks. Instead of Iguala being known as the birthplace of the national flag, now what it's known as is the Cuna de Asesinos, which is the birthplace of killers. That is the Iguala that they get to see now. This sign says, Bienvenidos a Iguala Guerrero. Welcome to Iguala Guerrero. They get to see an Iguala that has become militarized, where they see the federal police and the local police and the state police patrolling all the neighborhoods. They get to see our city hall being burned down during a protest. They get to see marches and protests every single month happening there in the city. And I attended one of these marches in December. and it was quite an incredible sight to see. The Iguala that my cousins are growing up in today is an Iguala where college students disappear overnight and where the government cannot provide the answers to the questions, and where they get to write their own version of the story full of falsehoods and deception. The Iguala of today is an Iguala with crosses in the intersections and bullet holes in the buildings. And this is a picture that I took in December when I was there visiting my family. And this is the intersection where the 43 students were taken that night. The Iguala that my cousins are growing up in today is surrounded by mass graves. During the search for the students, 60 mass graves have been found near the place where I grew up. This is also part of Iguala that my cousins are growing up in, an Iguala surrounded by poppy fields to supply the opium needed for the heroin that is in high demand here in the US. Mexico has become the #1 supplier of heroin to the US. It has surpassed Colombia. And my home state of Guerrero grows about 70% of the crops. So you see young people tending the fields. And the increase in demand of heroin here in the US has caused a lot of changes in my hometown, in my home state. In Guerrero, you know, there's criminal gangs that are battling for control of the state. And my hometown of Iguala Guerrero is one of the places where the opium paste gets packed and shipped to laboratories all over the country and also here in the US. So right now, one of the stories that have been coming out in regards to the disappearances of the 43 students is that there's a connection there with the buses that are used to ship this opium paste. They believe that the students might have commandeered buses that were actually loaded with this opium paste, and they didn't know about it. And there's a theory that the cartel, that's one of the reasons why they were attacked, because there was opium paste in the buses, one of the buses that they commandeered. So these are some of the things that are happening in my home state. And I wanted to talk a little bit about it because I feel like a lot of times we don't really get to hear in the news what's really going on in Mexico. And for me, you know, I like to talk, whenever I talk, I always try to make it personal. And this is as personal as it gets with talking about my city and the changes that have been happening there in my city. And how sad it is for me, you know, to see that 30 years later, my city has changed in ways that are not good for the communities, are not good for, you know, the people that still live there. And I really wish things were different for them. But that's their reality. That's their Iguala that they're dealing with. And when I think about Iguala, you know, I have a different Iguala in my mind, and that's the Iguala that I write about. But when I go there to visit my family, that's when I get to hear about what life is like in Iguala today and what my family is dealing with today. And I actually, I go there now every year to my hometown to do a Christmas toy giveaway. And I go in December. Last year, I bought over 700 toys to give to the kids there in the community. And this year, I just started buying all the toys again. And my aunt told me that she's afraid for me to come to Iguala this year because, you know, more people have been getting killed. My stepfather's 2 nephews got killed. One was killed a few months ago. He was 21 years old. And the other one was killed 2 weeks ago, and he was 18. So she's kind of encouraging me that maybe I shouldn't come this year to do the toy giveaway. But those are some of the things that are happening there. And, you know, if you would like to find out more about what's going on in my hometown and what's going on with the 43 missing students, there is an event here on campus that is going to be happening on October 8th. It's called Teaching for Ayotzinapa, October 8th at 3 p.m. at the St. Augustine Center, room 300. And it's been organized by the Department of Romance, Languages, and Literatures. And the people in charge are Dr. Raúl Diego Rivera Hernandez and Dr. Torres Hidalgo Nava. So I really encourage you to attend this teaching and to find out a little bit more of what's going on in Mexico and with the 43 missing students. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about the book, and then I'm going to get ready to answer all the questions because I know that there's a lot waiting for me. But The Distance Between Us is a book that I wrote mostly because I wanted to say something about immigration and the immigrant experience. I felt that at the time when I first decided to write the book, the country had been talking about what to do with its undocumented immigrant population. And a lot of the times, when we hear about immigration or immigrants, it is often more about the numbers, the statistics. And I feel that when we remove their humanity, when we talk about immigrants in terms of numbers and not in terms of people as human beings, we make decisions that are not often, with compassion, done with compassion and goodwill. So I set out to write this book about my own experience with immigration as a way to contribute to the conversation we were having as a country. And I made the conscious decision to write a memoir and not to write any statistics or data in the book. I wanted it to be extremely personal, and I wanted it to be about my family's journey and experience with immigration. So I started to write The Distance Between Us. One of the goals that I had for writing this book was to really show how immigration impacts the entire family. Because again, a lot of times when we talk about immigration, we talk about the individual immigrant, and we don't talk about the family that gets affected by immigration. I also really wanted to write about immigration from a child's perspective, because that is also another voice that we don't often hear. We talk about immigrations, most of the time we're talking about adult immigrants, and we forget that they're also child migrants here. And I wanted to tell our story. I tried to capture my life before and after, because that's how I always think of my life, as that before and after I crossed the border. Crossing the border was a huge moment for me, and I wanted to capture what my life was like before I crossed the border, because an immigrant's journey doesn't begin at the border crossing, it begins much before. And I wanted to write about my experience of what it was like to be left behind when my parents came here, what their separation did to me and my siblings as we were growing up. We're little children. When we most needed our parents by our side, they were not there. And my childhood, in many ways, is defined by my parents' absence. And just thinking, of myself as a young girl, yearning to have a family, yearning to have my parents, and wondering why they had left, and understanding why they were so far from me. And writing the book actually really helped me to understand that drove my parents to come here to the U.S. and to leave behind. In the book, I also captured my experience as an immigrant in the U.S. and to write about, the struggles of learning a language, learning a new culture. But to me, the emphasis on writing about the experience in the U.S. was really to talk about how immigration had impacted my family. What was the family life at home like? So I write a little bit about my life outside of home, but also inside the home and what that was like. And to write about the dynamics, of my family and how hard it was to reconnect with a father I hadn't seen in 8 years. and to try to pick up the pieces of my broken family and try to put it together, and never quite really being able to overcome that separation. I write about, the opportunity that I had to legalize my status and how getting a green card in my hand gave me the courage and gave me the hope of actually making it in this country and actually, being able to make my dreams a reality. And in writing about that experience, I was trying to also write about the experience of our undocumented youth. We have about 5 million undocumented youth in the US who have also been fighting to legalize their status. And what I wanted to show in the book was, what happens when we give this opportunity to our youth and allow them to really, fulfill their dreams and become part of this community, part of our country, and being able to use their passion and their talents and their skills to give back in the way that now I'm able to give back to this country because of that opportunity. So those were so many of the things that I was trying to address in the book. And one of the things I think for me that I'm most proud of is just being able to become the first in my family to graduate from college. As you know from reading the book, my father only went to the 6th grade, and my mother went to the 6th grade, and my father only went to the 3rd grade. And coming to this country, one of the things that my father always said to me was that it didn't matter if we were undocumented or not, that we could still dream big dreams. And we always had to be ready for what the future might bring, because you never knew what opportunities might come our way, and we had to be ready. And that's something that I really value, being able to hear that from my dad and being given the permission to dream big. And to him, education was very important. He threatened to send us back to Mexico if we didn't get good grades. So I wasn't afraid of Border Patrol as much as I was afraid of my dad deporting me. But holding that over my head really helped me to stay focused and to really work hard to make education part of me, part of my dreams. So being able to graduate from college and having a BA and an MFA is something that I think for me it's what I value the most, because now I'm able to be in a position where the new generation in my family, the new Grandes growing up, will have someone, a role model, and I'll be able to guide all my nieces and nephews and my own children and push them in that direction of going to college. So right now I'm still the only one that has graduated from college, but my nieces and nephews are now in senior. I have 3 seniors in high school, and they're all looking into applying for colleges, so very happy about that, and very excited to see all the changes happening in my life and my family's life, and to see how far we come, in our journey, in our pursuit of the American dream. And in the book, I focus on the price that immigrants pay for that American dream. Everything that we gain and everything that we lose in our pursuit for a better life. So thank you so much. I'm gonna open it up now for questions.
So these are a compilation of the questions we have from the audience. And the first question we have for you is, what was the most difficult part of writing the book?
The most difficult part was writing about my father, because I had a very troubled relationship with my dad. It was a very complicated relationship. And when I was writing the second half of the book, which is all about my father was diagnosed with liver cancer. And as I wrote the book, his health just got worse and worse, and he was in and out of the hospital. And writing the book, I had to revisit my adolescence and write about those moments, very difficult moments with my dad when he was not at his best. He was an alcoholic and very abusive. And so I was writing about that father and bringing up in the writing all my emotions, a lot of anger, a lot of resentment, a lot of pain. And then when I was done writing for the day, I would go to the hospital to see my dad. And I had to remind myself, this is not the father you're writing about. This is this is the father in the present, the one who's dying. So that was kind of hard, juggling the two fathers at the same time, and just unearthing too many emotions that I had to deal with. So that was a difficult part of writing the book. And the best part of writing the book, you didn't ask, but I will tell you, the best part about writing the book was revisiting my childhood years when my older sister played a huge role in my life. And just being able to go back to those moments, when she was my little mother and she was always taking care of me and looking out for me. And that was the best part of writing that book because, we've changed, we're adults now and our relationship is not the same anymore. I'm not the little girl that needs a mother, and she's not the older sister who wants to be anyone's mother, like she has her own children to take care of. So we have a very different relationship now, and being able to write about when I was her little baby and she took care of me, that was the best part. Yeah.
The next question is kind of in three parts. Was it hard to publicize such a personal experience? Were you concerned about negative reactions from your parents, and did they read the book?
Yeah. When I was writing the memoir, in order for me to write it, I have to lie to myself and tell myself that nobody was going to read the book. So that's how I managed to get through it. And my wake-up call to reality was when I got a phone call from my publisher, from Simon & Schuster's lawyer, called me and said, I read the memoir. We need to go over some things so you don't get sued. And that's when I said, oh my God, someone's going to read my book and sue me. And so she had me go, make a few changes here and there so I wouldn't get sued. Yeah. So that was when I finally realized that it was going to be published and people were going to read it, and it was scary. My parents, my parents, because they didn't really have much of an education, books were not part of their upbringing. They weren't part of who they were. So when I started writing and publishing books, it didn't mean a whole lot to them. They didn't really get it much in that sense, how I wanted them to get it. When my first book came out, Across 100 Mountains, I gave them each a copy of the book. And it just sat there on the shelf, just, gathering dust. And I knew that, because my parents didn't speak much English and the book was written in English, I said, oh, I have to write it in Spanish so they can read it. And I talked to my editor and she allowed me to translate into Spanish, and she published it. So when the Spanish version came out, I gave them each a copy, and again, it just sat there gathering dust. And I said, what, you want the audiobook now? So yeah, so they never read it. And then, my second book came out and they still didn't read it. So by the time I wrote this book, I'm like, they're not gonna read it anyway, So I wasn't so stressed out about what they were gonna say because I knew they weren't gonna read it. And then my father passed away before the book was published. And it made me a little sad, not because I knew he wasn't gonna read it, but just I was really looking forward to giving him a copy of the book. But he passed away. And then my mother still didn't read the book, even though it came out in Spanish. She still didn't read it. So one time I did an interview with Jorge Ramos. I don't know if you guys know Jorge Ramos. He's like, the most famous Mexican journalist here in the country. And he interviewed me about the book. And he was saying, Reyna, this is such a great book, and I love this book. And my mother watched the interview. So after the interview, she calls me and she says, I guess I'm going to read your book because Jorge Ramos said it was good. So, yeah, so I thank Jorge Ramos for making my mother read my book.
And as a supplement to that, has your relationship with your family changed since the book, and if so, how?
It has changed. For me, I think the most important change has been my relationship with my mother. It is much, much better than it's ever been. And I thank the book for that because when I wrote the book, I had a very interesting experience with my parents writing the book because, up until then, I had always seen my parents through the eyes of the daughter that was left behind. So there was a lot of anger there. There was a lot of resentment there, a lot of pain. But when I began to write the book, my parents became characters in my book. And when I write a book, I write my characters. I pay a lot of attention to my characters. I study them from every single angle to really bring them to life. And when my parents became characters in my book, I had to stop looking at them as my parents and more as my characters. And I studied everything that made them who they were. I studied their childhoods. I studied, the society in which they were growing up, their families, their parents that were raising them. I studied their fears and their dreams and everything that made them who they were. And by doing that, it really allowed me to think of my parents as human beings, with all their flaws and all their virtues. And that really helped me to finally start looking at them differently. And with my mother, it was such a tremendous change for me when I finally saw my mother as not just my mother, but as a wife that was also left behind. And why she made the choice to leave her children so that she could be with her husband, and the heartache that she suffered when my father left her for another woman, and all the things, that made her who she was. And it really helped me to have a much better relationship with her. So nowadays, I get along with my mother so much better now because of the book. And with my siblings, our relationship didn't change a whole lot because we've always been very close. And writing the book, I really try to tell their story, not just mine. So it was me and my siblings' story. And what I did was every time I wrote a new chapter, I would print it out and show them what I was writing. So they were part of the writing process. And that was like it was a process that really bonded us together even more because I felt like we're writing the book together. And so that was really great. So I think, with my siblings, it's been a really wonderful experience. And I do have, a few family members from the Grande side that are really pissed at me because I call my grandmother my evil grandmother and I say how bad she was. And they're all mad at me for writing about that. And I'm like, well, she was bad. What can I say? So yeah, they're mad about me. They're mad at me for doing that. But yeah, but they're not suing me yet, so that's good. Yeah.
So how are your siblings? What do you know Alida?
Elida?
Alida. And which sibling are you closest to today?
Ooh. Well, my siblings, they're doing well. We're all working, supporting our families. We're parents and wives and husbands now. We have 13 children between us. I only have two, so don't think I have a soccer team. So we have a big responsibility, to our children and to make sure that they don't grow up in the same situation that we grew up in. So we try to really stay connected, keep the drama to a minimum, and just really, be there for the kids and give them a very, stable, happy life as best we can. Um, yeah, with my cousin Elida, I haven't seen her since I left Mexico. so it's been over 30 years that I haven't seen her. And she lives in Los Angeles as well. Her mother eventually brought her over, but she suffers a lot from depression, from what I hear. And she's never been able to forgive her mom for leaving her for so many years. So they have a lot of problems, you know, and they've never been able to overcome that separation. So that, to me, like, it's, you know, it's really, it's sad, you know, to hear that she's still struggling, you know, with the trauma of that experience. But like I write in the book, you know, I had my siblings. I had my sister, I had my brother, and they protected me, and we were together in this experience, whereas Elida was on her own. And I think for her, it was so much harder, you know, to overcome that.
Next question is, if you had not come to America, how do you think your life would be different?
It would be like what I just showed you, dealing with that, you know, living up in Iguala, and dealing with all that violence and instability and the poverty. And yeah, I don't think my life would be much different from when I was a child, except for, you know, it would be much worse, actually. Every time I go to Mexico, I'm always reminded of that. You know, what would my life be like if I hadn't left? And when I go back there and I visit my family, I get the answer to my question. When I see them, you know, still living in shacks, still living in the same poverty, not a whole lot has changed for them. And, you know, I have that uncle, the one I write about in the book, my tío Gadi. And when I see him, you know, he had a lot of kids, and every single kid of his had to drop out of elementary school to go to work. And so none of my cousins from him have finished elementary school. They're all working as trash pickers, you know, trash collectors. Like, they go from house to house picking up people's trash, and for like 10 pesos or something, and then they take it home and look through the trash to try to find like scrap metal or recyclables, that kind of stuff. And when I see them, you know, I really think a lot about the choices that parents make. And I think about, you know, the choice that my father made to break up the family and come to the US to seek a better life. And in the process, you know, he left his children and his wife behind, and me and my siblings have grown up with a lot of trauma, a lot of, you know, psychologically messed up in the head, you know, that's why I write. So we suffer, you know, we still suffer from that experience of being separated. But then I look at, you know, my uncle's kids, and I feel, you know, my uncle, my mom would tell my uncle every year, come to the US, come to the US. And my uncle would always say, I'd rather be poor but together. So my cousins, they never had to suffer from having, you know, their father leave. They never had to see their family being broken up. They grew up with, you know, a mother and a father. So they don't suffer from that trauma. But again, you know, none of them were able to graduate from elementary school, and they're living in that same poverty that their father lived in. So I think about the choice my father made and the choice my uncle made. And in many ways I say, well, you're damned if you do it and you're damned if you don't. And there's no easy answer. You know, there's no easy answer. Do you do it or do you not do it? Because whatever choice you make, there's going to be consequences.
In addition to that, do you feel more American or more Mexican?
Well, when I'm in the US, I feel more Mexican. And then when I go to Mexico, they all treat me like an American. So over there, I'm not Mexican enough, and they all look at me like a foreigner, like an outsider. And you know, when I go to Mexico, I try to pass off as one of the locals. And so I only speak Spanish there and everything. I just try to wear whatever people there wear. And I remember like the next day after I got to Mexico in December, I get in a cab in Iguala. I get in the cab, and the first thing the cab driver says to me is, "You're not from here, are you?" And I said, "How did you know?" I hadn't even opened my mouth yet, so they couldn't hear my broken Spanish. And then he says, "You put on your seatbelt." So, yeah. I mean, I feel part of both countries. Growing up and being born in Mexico and growing up there, it in many ways it shaped me who I am and how I see the world. And then coming here to the U.S. and I've been here for 30 years now. I am very American, in many ways, and I know this country better than I know my own country, like in Mexico. Like I know this country very well. I feel very comfortable here. I travel everywhere. I've seen it. I think I've been to like 35 states here in the U.S. So I know this country very well. I know the way of life and everything. I speak English better than I speak Spanish. And when I go over there, there are so many things that I don't know. And even like some of the holidays, I don't really know them anymore. And that's why like I try to go as often as I can just so I can experience that and remember what holidays are celebrated there and how they do it and the way of life. Because in some ways it does feel a little foreign to me sometimes when I go. And especially when people look at me and they treat me like an outsider. That is also it's painful.
Next question. Through everything, how did you keep your faith?
How do I keep my faith?
I have to do the book. How did you keep your faith to know that everything was going to be okay?
Yeah. How I kept my faith. One of the things that really helped me was to visualize where I wanted to end up. So I thought of myself 5 years from now or 10 years from now, where do I want to be? And a lot of the things that I did was to get myself to that place. So that really helped me to stay focused on that, that vision that I had of myself in the future. I also developed a second personality. So now I'm crazy. I developed my alter ego, and this was the other Reyna, and the other Reyna who was strong and who was confident. And whenever I found myself, scared, the other Reyna would come out and tell me that things were going to be okay, and I just had to stay focused and keep working hard. So I had that other Reyna in my head, and I still have her. She's talking right now, actually.
And follow-up question, how did you find the strength to write about your struggles?
How did I find the strength to write about my struggles? Um, well, when I started to write, I wanted to write about my experiences, but at the same time, it was very scary to write about the things I had gone through. And what I started to do was I was just writing fiction. And it was autobiographical fiction. I always wrote about myself and my struggles and things that I had gone through, but I was hiding behind the fiction, and I would create characters to stand in for me. So I was writing, short stories and novels, and almost everything was all about me, but not really about me because it was all fictionalized. And one day I realized that I was still, really hurting from my experiences. I had a bad relationship with my mom and very complicated relationship with my dad. And I decided that I really needed to confront my experiences, my reality, and write my truths without hiding behind the fiction. And that was when I started to write The Distance Between Us. And I said, I'm going to write it however it comes out, I'm gonna write about, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And a lot of ugly stuff came out. You guys are seeing the final draft. You didn't see the first draft. There was a lot of ugly stuff that came out, but it really, my reality, it really set me free in a way that I had never been free before. And I was able to really come to a place of understanding and a place of forgiveness, a place of compassion for my parents. And just it allowed me to finally heal and be able to live my life in a good way where I could stop hurting and actually start helping other people who have gone through that experience. So that's something that really helped me to write about my struggles, write about my reality, and just face it straight on, and not be afraid of it. Because our past is who we are, and we have to be able to embrace it and be able to accept it, and in order for us to move on, with our lives.
This will be the last question for the evening.
Okay. What advice would you give to your younger self? What advice would I give to my younger self?
Don't kiss too many frogs. I did find my Prince Charming, 'cause here's my father-in-law. I have to thank him for creating my Prince Charming. Yeah, when I was in high school and college, I kissed too many frogs. I was very desperate, growing up in a household where my father, was a very difficult man, where he never said I love you, where, I was never made to feel as the daddy's girl, his princess, the way my daughter feels with her dad. So I was trying to find that love outside of the home. And so I was, always, the way I saw myself was always through the eyes of what boys thought of me or things like that. So, yeah, I think in college, in high school, I wish that if I could go back, I could tell myself not to care about what any boys thought about me, that I should just work hard and just focus on the things I wanted to do, and that one day I was going to meet the right guy for me. So that's what I would tell myself. Yeah.
I think we're going to speak for everybody here when we say what a wonderful experience this has been. So, on behalf of the entire Villanova community, we wanted to thank you, Ms. Grande, for being here and just gracing us with your presence and being such a wonderful person. Thank you.